Alarm clock. I've had this alarm clock for 25 years now. It was a Hanukkah gift from my parents when I was in about 3rd or 4th grade. It has lived with me in 8 different states, traveled across the country several times, and woke me up more times than anything else combined. The clock can make nature noises, both for waking up and for falling asleep. It can be set to make a white noise of ocean, forest, or stream. All of which are equally tinny, mechanical, and horrible, and I have never used this feature of the clock. The clock has 2 alarms, which can be set independently to make, you can't really read this, but to birds, seagulls, or mechanical bell. And while all of them are equally jarring enough to get me out of bed in the morning, I've only ever used the mechanical bell setting. The other ones are kind of silly. To set the time on the clock, that you use that brown dial circle that goes around the time. If you turn it to the right, time goes quickly forward, and if you turn it to the left, time goes slowly backwards. So the idea is that to set it, you go very quickly past the time that you want, and then you can dial it in exactly by going slowly backwards. However, it goes so slowly in reverse that unless the time that I want to set it to is an hour or less behind the current time, I always go forward. Even if it's 20 hours further ahead, it might actually take more time to go forward, but it's so frustratingly slow to go backwards that it feels better to go forwards. And over 25 years of setting this clock, I have thought of all the ways that it could have been designed better. The clock used to have a circular faceplate that went around the time that had some labels for some of the indicator lights, and it fell off sometime in the mid-90s and has not been missed. You can still see some of the glue that's remaining from where the faceplate was attached some 20 years ago. And other than that, the clock works as well or as horribly as it ever has. And this is the real reason why I still have it. It has never broken, so I've never needed to replace it, and it is still by my bed. I don't have any sentimental attachment to it. Both my grandparents have passed on, but I have nicer things from them to remind me of them. It's kind of clunky and ugly. I don't use and never have and never will over half the clock's features, and I find the time setting to be very annoying. But it has never broken, I've never had to replace it, and it is still by my bed. Shortly after getting this clock, I began playing a game on nights where I couldn't fall asleep. As a way to help me fall asleep, I invented this game, and I call it the clock game. And here's how it works. Look at the time. Wait a minute. Now, calculate the difference in the number of LED bars needed to spell out the previous time and the current time. So, 9:13 in the number 3 requires 5 LED bars to spell out the 3, whereas the 4 only needs 4. So that's a difference of 1. So that gives you 1 point, and that point goes into the bank. At 9:15, the 5 requires 1 more bar than the 4, so you lose a point, comes out of the bank, and your balance is now 0. Then at 9:16, the 6 requires 1 more bar than the 5. So you lose another point, and you actually have to borrow a bar now, so you have a -1 balance in the bank. But no worries, because at 9:17, you get 3 bars off the 6 to turn into the 7, and that gives you a +2 balance in the bank. So the game goes on like this. Wait for the time to change, calculate the difference, keep track of how many points you have in the bank, always hoping to have a positive balance. Now, for instance, in this example, at 9:20, it gets more interesting because 2 numbers are changing. Or, if you're up for 40 more minutes, and at 10 o'clock, the change of the hour gets really exciting because all the numbers are changing. Now, really exciting might be a stretch of the definition of those words, but remember, this game was invented to help me fall asleep. As I got older, it occurred to me that I could play this game in my head, perhaps because I got impatient waiting for the minutes to change. I realized I could fast forward the clock in my head and play several minutes in advance, if not several hours in advance. But I think doing the mental math served the same purpose of helping me to fall asleep. More recently, however, it occurred to me, well, what would happen if you started midnight one night and worked through the whole day and calculate, what would you get playing from midnight to midnight the next day? So I'm not going to spend a lot of the time on the math here. I'm just going to breeze through it real quick. And this is sort of the quick version, calculating it based on minutes and then hours. But suffice to say that if you start at midnight and you go through to midnight the next day, after 24 hours, you have a balance of 0. And I did this twice to make sure that that worked out, because that just seemed kind of amazing. Now, as a kid, even as a kid, I knew that this game was pointless, right? That it was really just invented to help me fall asleep. But there seemed to be something serendipitously beautiful about it literally being pointless. Pointless. That you could play this game day in and day out, and at the end of every day, you would just come back to having 0 points. But even more recently, as in like a week ago, it occurred to me that, of course, it's going to come out to 0. It's a closed loop, and that's how it works. So we can look at it as a simpler example with blocks. If you have 5 blocks, and you go down to 3 blocks, and then you go up to 6 blocks, and then you go back to 5 blocks, it doesn't matter how many times you do this, you're always going to come out with a balance of 0, because it's the same number of parts that you're using again and recycling and going around again and again. Now, it's the same thing with the clock if you think of the LED bars as blocks. So there's nothing serendipitously beautiful about it, it's just math. One way to look at a game of basketball is that they all end the same. After 48 minutes, the clock runs out. And that's it. But, of course, as we all know, what makes a game of basketball interesting is what happens while the clock is going. So, as a kid, I had the essential chance element of this game right, before I started fast-forwarding it in my head, and that was the chance element of falling asleep. So the game isn't meant to be played for 24 hours. It's meant to be played for 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or maybe 20 minutes at the most, with the hopes of coming out with a positive balance before you fall asleep. And that's the clock game.